One of the real challenges that I think people face when they come to practice Zen is that in our culture, in our society today, so much of our learning begins with an intellectual or conceptual approach. We like to understand what we're getting into. Zen practice, on the other hand, has been developed or cultivated over centuries of practice to engage us directly, immediately, on an experiential level, to circumvent the intellectual. Many people come to Zen practice because they're interested in meditation, learning how to do meditation. And when they hear about meditation, when they think about meditation, often the idea is what we're doing right now, just a seated meditation. In Zen training, sitting meditation is just one aspect. It's the foundation. It's perhaps the first aspect, but it's just one aspect. When we come to a Zen meditation hall, a Zendo, from the moment we enter into the room, before we sit down, we are engaged, we are embraced by the form of practice. Many people, when they investigate Buddhism or when they come to look at Zen, come to understand that Zen practice places a lot of emphasis on the investigation of this thing, this concept, this idea that we call a self. Coming into Zen practice, I think that many people say, okay, I think I can take a look at this thing that I call myself. I want to come to a better understanding of it. But when we look at Zen practice like this, we are coming at it from a conceptual or an intellectual level. We're not going to think about the self in Zen practice. Quite to the contrary, our practice in Zen is to investigate the self experientially. So from the moment that we enter into the room, the form of practice is designed to bring ourself forward and challenge us. The practice of seated meditation is a practice of clarifying the mind, stabilizing the mind, preparing the equipment, so to speak. In seated meditation, we learn how to be aware. We learn how to be present. We learn how to return to the activity that's unfolding in front of us, even when it's uncomfortable, even when we have more interesting things to distract ourselves with, either internally or externally. In Zen practice, we recommend sitting a lot. We do sit a lot because clarifying this awareness, clarifying this tool is of significant importance. The rest of our form challenges us. I think that if I were to ask people if there were aspects of an evening of practice that they didn't particularly care for, I think I would get answers from almost every person. The walking is a pain. Keeping in step, and people are always out of step, and people are always telling us to keep in step, and I'm always falling out of step, and I'm always cutting corners, always getting distracted. or chanting. I had a conversation today with somebody who found chanting frustrating. Why do we have to do it? What's it all about? I feel stupid when I do it. All of these activities, our emotional, physical responses to them, our resistances to bowing when the clappers sound, to standing up when it's time to stand up, to walking in step. All of these things are not accidental. And although the popular image of Buddhism is just to sort of not bother anybody or make everybody happy, the practice of Zen is about literally kind of drawing out your edges in an environment which is stable and supportive, allowing us to develop a mind and the ability to see our edges, to experience them fully, to explore where they're coming from, not as a concept, but more deeply felt. To experience the truth that when these resistances arise, there is always a choice. We can latch on to that resistance. We can latch on to that aversion and hold ourselves outside of the experience. Hold ourselves separate from the walking and be a person who is looking at the walking, or be a person who is going along with the walking. Or we have the choice to realize or to see, experience that resistance and to let it go, to dissolve completely into the activity, so that in the practice of walking, the individual who is walking, the feet that are moving, the line of people that are engaged in the practice together, the room itself, the whole world dissolves into this single activity of walking. When we do this, perhaps for the first time, we experience what it is to be manifesting harmoniously with our environment. It doesn't last for long. Immediately, our self arises again and says, well, what was that about? Why are we doing this? All the questions come back up. But in that single moment, in that single breath of dissolution, all of the world, all of the words, all of the concepts about unification and wholeness and oneness drop away, and they are replaced with a felt experience. So maybe in a classroom or something like this, if we're to talk about Buddhism and talk about all things being intimately connected, interrelated, and even in science today, there is much talk about how all things are fundamentally made up of the same stuff. One thing. This is not a difficult concept to grasp. It's not a difficult concept to grasp that when we do things in this world, we impact the whole cosmos. But so long as it remains a concept, we don't change. We are not transformed by our understanding. Our practice in Zen is to engage in the investigation of the activity of this cosmos, to develop our awareness, and to experience this activity as it functions through us, in our relationships, in our bodily movements, in every activity that we engage in. And unlike our understanding, unlike the conceptual grasping of this principle of interrelatedness, oneness, this experience, the experience of unification, is irresistible. Irresistible in its capacity to transform us. Little bit by little bit, our hold on ourselves as fixed objects dissolves away. Little bit by little bit, our attachment to the idea of things should be or shouldn't be this way or that way slips away, melts away, drops off. Little bit by little bit, we find ourselves able to embrace the activity that is unfolding in front of us, the very activity of our life, this cosmos. We find that we are able to embrace it, to engage it, to manifest harmoniously with the activity of our lives. Not adding anything in, not trying to avoid anything, because we come to realize that this moment, just as it is unfolding before us, is complete. There's nothing more to add. There's nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to do. In Zen we have this phrase, our true home. Many of us spend a whole lot of time trying to find a place that we belong, where we can feel at home. This form of practice, this form of training that we engage in Zen Buddhism, allows us to realize that this moment, every moment, when we awaken to it, already is our true home.